How important is it that you know exactly what a hacker is going to do to steal your data in order to prevent a data breach? That's what we're going to find out today. Welcome to Threat Talks. My name is Lieuwe Jan Koning, and here from the Security Operations Center at Onto-It, we bring you Threat Talks, the deep dive. And the subject of today is turning the tables on attackers. Let's get on to it.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
Let me introduce our guest of today. It's Rick Howard. We already had him on the show last week, so I'm really thrilled he is back today. And, you know him from a lot of things, maybe. Certainly check out our latest episode if you haven't seen it. It's a great introduction to today's deep dive. But to reiterate, Rick started his career at West Point and had a long career in the US military. And the coolest part from our nerdy perspective is that he was the commander of the US Army Computer Emergency Response Team. And it sounds a little bit like Star Trek, and it actually is. He lived the future. He lived in the future. And then he did a lot of other things. Amongst those, he used to be the CSO of Palo Alto Networks. Imagine you're responsible for the security of a leading cybersecurity company, right? And now he runs a nonprofit, the Cybersecurity Canon Project, which tells you which books to read and which books not to read. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the episode, and in the show notes there are some really useful links that will save you a lot of time. Rick, once again, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it.
First of all, my first question, just to get a rough estimate on attackers that are out there. How many attacker campaigns are there? I mean, is that millions, maybe thousands, or 100,000s?
I love this question. And I ask this question everywhere I go to speak because most people guesstimate that it's really high. Okay. You get into a room of CISOs and you ask them that particular question, they're going to say millions. They're going to say thousands. Would it be a surprise to you to learn that it's just 250 active adversary campaigns operating in the world at any given day? It's just 250.
So we only have to stop 250 groups.
Right. You could track it with a spreadsheet if you wanted to. Okay. I don't recommend it, but you could if you wanted to.
Okay. Well, we'll learn a lot about that today. Last episode we talked about your book, a reboot of strategy in the cybersecurity space. And one of the things we talked about strategies. One of them was zero trust, as Onto is very familiar with, of course. But we also talked about another one that was incepted around the same time frame, 2010, 2011 or so.
2010, yeah.
Yeah, by Lockheed Martin. Let's start with, could you please explain what that is? What is the cyber kill chain?
The idea of the intrusion kill chain came from the Lockheed Martin researchers, published their white paper in 2010, the same year that Kindervog published his white paper on zero trust. And both of those ideas changed the industry. Well, we're going to talk about kill chain first, and so let me tell you the significance of it. It flipped the idea of what we had to do as network defenders. Before the Lockheed Martin paper came out, you would hear security practitioners say, the good guys have to be perfect all the time, and the bad guys only have to get it right one time. And they were referring to, getting a new piece of exploit code that we didn't know about or some new piece of malware. That's what we all believed. The Lockheed Martin kill chain paper flipped the script because it said that adversaries have to complete a series of steps across a number of phases. They have to get every one of those right in order to be successful. The good guys trying to prevent it only have to defeat them one place, the kill chain. That's where you break the chain and they can't be successful. Completely changed how we think about cybersecurity.
Yeah, significant thing to all think about. And that's why it's one of your major strategies that you need to at least consider, practice, whatever. Yeah. There you mentioned that previously there's a few other principles that are closely related to this, maybe. Can you name a few?
Yeah, when you talk about kill chain stuff, other papers get thrown into the mix. And one of them is a U.S. Department of Defense paper called the Diamond Model. Mm-hmm. And the other one that most people are familiar with is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Mm-hmm. And when you talk to security professionals, they all think those are three separate things. And that's not true. They're all talking about intrusion, kill chain, defense. But the Lockheed Martin paper was more of a strategic view of how to think about it. The Diamond Model is how do you organize your intelligence team to prevent adversaries from being successful? How do you collect information? That kind of thing. And then the MITRE ATT&CK framework was really an operationalizing of those ideas on very specific elements, what you should collect and what you should build prevention controls for. So all those three things go together.
Can you summarize a little bit the diamond model?
The diamond model says the reason it's called a diamond model is there's 4 vertices that look like a diamond, right? And there's operators, there's bad guys, there's things they attack, and infrastructure that they go for, right? And they group them in pairs, right? And you should be collecting intelligence in those pairs to say this pair is this kind of intelligence and this is what goes with it. That's a really gross simplification of the diamond model, right? But that's essentially what it is.
Okay, gotcha. And then the MITRE ATT&CK framework, actually, we use it a lot in Zero Trust, so there's probably some
overlap there.
Some overlap there, yeah. What do you use the value of this? I mean, MITRE ATT&CK framework is there for everybody to see, and there's a lot of things you can do with it.
Sure. Before the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the items of intelligence we would collect were these, things like IP addresses and ports that we knew were, important, but they were illusory, right? Because bad guys could change them at the drop of a hat and did. So by the time you got around to putting blocks in, they were already moved on to the next thing. The MITRE ATT&CK framework put in some very specific tactics, techniques, and procedures for known adversary groups, things we know that they did to traverse the kill chain, all right? And so it gave us more detail, and it gave us things to focus on what we should collect and what our intelligence team should build prevention controls for our internal security stacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's just not the lowest level operational data,
Right.
but more like to get into their minds a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a bit like know your enemy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say it's exactly right. And it's one of my pet peeves in my entire career. We spend most of our time in my early days trying to prevent technical things from happening. We want to prevent that virus from spreading. We want to prevent this piece of malware or prevent this exploitation code from working. They have no association with adversaries. What the MITRE ATT&CK framework allows us to do, and the intrusion kill chain philosophy, is we're going to build defenses to known adversary campaigns. And our purpose is to defeat them, not just defeat some technical tool.
Mm-hmm. It sounds really hard and resource intensive to do so.
Yeah.
And you know where I'm come from a Zero Trust world, where I'd rather not know the enemy, right? I mean, if I don't have to, and how I always think of this is, in my home, I have a lock on my door and all that. But I'm not going to wonder who is going past my home, drives past my home, what nationality they have, what car they drive. I don't care about it as long as they don't get in. So that's the whole thinking of Zero Trust. I don't care. But I do put a lock on, of course. I have my house is not from paper, but from stone, and those kinds. So I do take all kinds of measures. So if they would be, but I don't care where they're from, who they are exactly, but also not whether they use a crowbar or they drive their car into me.
Right. And there's a whole thing in our community about attribution, right? And there's a segment of our community that thinks attribution of who is doing the attacks, meaning what organization, that's important. Like, is it the Russians or is it the Chinese? You and I think, agree. We don't care if it's either of those guys. What I'm more interested in with the intrusion kill chain prevention philosophy is the attribution of the kill chain steps. All right. I want to know what they did at each step so I can put prevention controls in place in my security stack, right, for every one of those. And we've talked about in the past, right? Let's say Wicked Spider, or known adversary campaign. Let's say they have 100 things that they do across the kill chain. If you see 2 or 3 of those in your infrastructure,
you should be worried.
I don't know. It might be them, but it might be 200 other campaigns. It really doesn't matter, right? Okay. But if you see 80 of the 100 that Wicked Spider uses, Wicked Spider's probably in your network, and you just haven't seen the other ones yet, right? So it gives you something to focus on, and it gives you more impetus to go make sure that Wicked Spider has not penetrated your defenses.
Do you think it's important to know that it is Wicked Spider?
Not that it's Wicked Spider, just the TTPs that Wicked Spider uses. We want to have prevention controls in place for all of those. So it might be useful to use a label and call these are the Wicked Spider TTPs, just to keep track of it in the SOC, right?
there are many organizations that do a kind of a threat modeling, try to figure out, and we sometimes get those questions also, like are the Russians on the rise in their attacks, or is it the Chinese, or is it, and yeah, from a defense perspective, I always think it's either very costly to figure out why, because you need to build a system where you gotta get them half in, right? I mean, a default denial rule on a firewall that blocks traffic,
Yeah.
which is them, and we're never going to figure out that it's them, right? So they need to have they need to progress into the kill chain to actually see, oh, this kind of malware, now we can attribute it to them, and I'd rather not get to that stage. Or it's too late and I know where the money flew. so now I know why it is. So it's to me, it's always a hard question to answer. Actually, the better our defenses are, the harder it gets.
That's true. I will say, though, that the sexy part of our group, of our work sometimes is, oh, we got hit by the Russians, or we got, right? People get excited about that. But like I'm with you on this. It doesn't matter that it's the Russians. And for most of us, if you're a commercial network defender or an academic, all right, it doesn't matter. For some small government organizations, so let's say the US CIA, they might care. And they have resources to decide.
I get that. Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But for commercial outfits, we don't have the resources to do it. It doesn't add to our bottom line of the business. It doesn't matter. What we're trying to do is put prevention controls in place for all the things that Wicked Spider does so that it reduces our probability of material risk. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so you would be a fool not to look what is going on.
Correct, yeah.
Because we might put up defenses that are really costly that nobody knows how to exploit, for example, or you forget something very common. That's so your defenses should be very much inspired by what you can actually see in the.
And I think it's doable. Okay, I go back to how many adversary campaigns are run. Like I said, it's just 250.
Yeah.
Right. I think we could monitor 250 adversary campaigns, even if each of those campaigns has 500 steps. I think it's possible for a SOC to monitor all that.
Yeah, but should the SOC of one single customer monitor all those, or do you mean as an industry we should do that?
We've tried the industry monitoring. Okay, the vendors say they do it, the governments say they do it, but we have difficulty sharing that information for some reason. We decided as an industry back in 1999 that cybersecurity information sharing, intelligence sharing in cyber was a good thing. In the US, we built the first ISACs. The first ISAC was the FS ISAC, probably the most famous of all the ISACs. That was 1999. It is now, while we're doing this podcast, 2025. Most of the sharing going on in the ISACs is still done with spreadsheets. And we're not tracking adversary campaigns. We're tracking all kinds of stuff, but not really get into the meat of the problem, I believe, right? And there's lots of reasons for that, right? For one, we're pretty good at collecting intelligence on adversary campaigns. Every security vendor on the planet has an intel team, and they're tracking these kinds of things, and they write papers and blogs about it. What we really suck at, okay, is automatically taking that information in, turning that into prevention controls for our deployed security stack, and pushing a button to get it deployed everywhere those devices are on the network. Yeah. We are not good at that.
Well, not across companies, not as an industry.
Yeah, as an industry, we're poor at it. Some companies are good at this, but most of us are not.
Yeah, I can imagine. So if there is indeed vendors that look at binaries in the wild and then see how they behave if different customers put those binaries on the block list, for example, very dynamically. But it hardly ever. Well, you're lucky if it crosses products like endpoint protection to network protection.
Well, that's a real hard problem, right? Because let's say the firewall I use is a Palo Alto Networks firewall. The firewall that you use is a Cisco firewall. The prevention controls I have to design for Wicked Spider on this one TTP, they're different for each of those products, right? And so that's a really hard problem to solve.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just doing layer 4 firewalling with port and 443 is an SSL site and 25 is email, etc., then it would be coded and there would be a common understanding in the industry that it worked like that.
Yeah, but those are ephemeral, right? Those things that get changed all the time, so that doesn't really work. You need the detailed TTPs, and we mentioned the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Okay, they're probably the most famous group that collects all this stuff. Yeah. If you look at like Wicked Spider's campaign, they may have 100 TTPs in their campaign, but you might only be able to put 50 controls in place for your security stack, depending on what you have, right? So it's really hard to do well.
Yeah, the way we try to do this in Zero Trust is step 3, I think, where you design your controls. That actually should take in a lot of intel of the world. That's the whole reason we have red teaming and threat intel in our own company, because you need to know how people use this, and then and that change. Actually, we're having debate currently whether we should change or how we should change authentication. I mean, so far it is everything needs to be multi-factor, so username, password, and whatever other factor. But what we now see is, since more people, the control becomes more popular.
Yeah.
Now attackers are stealing sessions. So
Sure.
probably the next iteration. So that's then a new MITRE attack. That's
Another TTP
on the rise.
They steal sessions, so we now have to devise a prevention control that will break that part of the kill chain.
Yeah. And for example, what probably needs to happen is that those session cookies need to be really short, and it should be really seamless to renew it all the time. And maybe with, and nobody likes to put in their OTP all the time, but maybe it should be like a Face ID or so that's constantly checking you whether you're behind your laptop, something like that. So that's how I think the whole kill chain analysis and the adversary analysis changes other strategies like Zero Trust as well.
As you said, adversaries are always come up with new tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? So that might be the next one that we have to figure out. What's interesting about the MITRE ATT&CK framework is all those TTPs start to converge. Okay, adversary campaigns, Wicked Spider in one example, and some other adversary group in another. There's only so many things you can do to attack an adversary. So you can start to group, and the 250 adversary campaigns, these 10 controls touch them all, right? And so
that's really valuable.
That's very valuable. And just by deploying those 10 steps, you could break the kill chain for all those adversaries.
Yeah, so so the train of thought here is, if I read you correctly, so we look at the kill chain, look at we map them all 250, we figure out the 10 things they all do.
Yeah.
And then for each and every one of them, we design a control, technical procedure, whatever it needs to be, implement it everywhere, and then we'll give them a really hard time.
Give them a hard time, and then monitor as they change their mind about,
of course,
right?
And they will. Yeah.
And they will, right? So, but that's a fantastic advantage to someone pursuing the intrusion kill chain philosophy.
So if you're an organization, how do you get this kind of information today?
Yeah, you're right about this is hard to do. Okay, if you're trying to do it yourself, okay, you have to manage your own intel team, and you have to put them on this kind of thing. So you need a really skilled team to do it if you're trying to do it by yourself.
But does the team have to scrape the internet on data on how they do it, or look at your own data?
They can look at your own data. They can also read the vendor blogs. They can, but most importantly, you can go right to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and just use what they have. That's the first step, and that gets most people into the game. All right. But like I said, it's not like it's easy, okay, to do all that. Okay, it's not. All right. So, but that's where you would start.
Yeah. Well, in the MITRE framework, I mean, they have mappings, huh? So you have the attacks, the techniques that we're talking about, and then they map that to countermeasures that you can take.
Right. Okay. And then
there's 200 of them or so.
Right. But then you have to take what do you have in your security stack? Let's say you have 10 security tools. You have to decide how to take their mappings and put it into your own vendor stuff. So that's the stuff that takes time.
Yeah. That's indeed what in practice in Zero Trust at least you do in step 3. Indeed. Yeah. Okay. So you talked a little bit about how analysis of kill chain, how that could be interesting to specific organizations such as governments. So for companies, it's probably very costly to understand how you specifically you are being attacked. Can you speak a little bit on, maybe you have some examples on how in the government, for example, I remember that at some point in a political campaign, in presidential campaign, when Mrs. Clinton was running, she got hacked. I believe there's some data on that where they actually did an investigation in the whole kill chain. Huh?
Yeah, I love that whole write-up. It's the most detail I've ever seen the FBI give for any kind of attack. They really went in depth for every stage of the kill chain on how the Russians infiltrated Secretary Clinton's campaign. And they didn't just infiltrate her own personal staff, but they infiltrated the Democratic National Committee and an auxiliary group called the DCCC, because many of the staffers worked in both groups. They all had the same user ID and password. So as soon as they...
Great idea.
Yeah. So really, this is back in 2016. They've gotten better since then. I want to make sure I state that.
Oh, the world,
Yeah.
the world is a bad place in practices in general.
Yeah.
So we're not judging.
Yeah.
Just noting that we have work to do. Yeah.
So look up the FBI's analysis of the Russian attacks against Secretary Clinton. It is mind-boggling. Okay.
It's publicly available. It's not something you know because of your background.
No, it's publicly available.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. All right. And it just gives incredible amounts of detail about how the Russians got in and did some of the things, right? And their goal was a smear campaign against Secretary Clinton. Now, I want to be sure to mention that they had other goals for the other side that weren't as successful. They were just trying to stir up chaos during the election. They were more successful against Secretary Clinton. Okay, so it goes across the entire kill chain. Here's what they did to set up their infrastructure before the attack happened. They had a money laundering scheme to build their infrastructure using Bitcoin, okay, to do all that. All right. Then they went after the number of targets in all those organizations, and they set up a watering hole that looked suspiciously like the Democratic National Committee website that everybody went to and put their credentials in. That's how they gathered them. They were once they got into the network, they were looking specifically for anything embarrassing to the campaign. Like, I don't know if you remember that campaign, but Benghazi and anything that we could throw at the candidate, right? And they compromised her chief of staff's computer, Leon Panetta, or Podesta. Now I don't know. John Podesta is his name, right? And stole all of his email, every single bit, right? So highly successful. And the FBI write-up sounds like a write-up you might have gotten from a security vendor. I mean, that's how detailed it was. So if you want an example of how to do kill chain analysis, go read the FBI report. Yeah.
And your point in this whole, because we're talking about this, is there's so much that from that analysis, although it's very extensive and expensive to do, you could learn so much on what is actually going on. You got to wonder, okay, how do I map all these things that they did to the controls we have in place, and is that sufficient or not?
Right. Okay.
And I would add in those places in the network that you care about.
Yeah. And I would add also that prevents a material attack.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Not just any attack, but a material attack.
And this was definitely a material attack. The one.
Yeah. Some people, it's debate in the community, in the intelligence community, and in the security community. Okay, about whether or not the attacks by the Russians caused Secretary Clinton to lose the elections. It was so close, right, that likely it didn't. Most likely it didn't, but
you never know.
You never know. Yeah,
it's too close to call almost. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Interesting example of how we should indeed be inspired. And I think we can conclude that we should at least be inspired by what attackers do in order to shape what we are.
So it goes to the question you were asking before. Shouldn't there be a centralized repository of that kind of intelligence? I've always thought that the FBI or the governments should decide that for adversary campaign Wicked Spider, let's do that analysis and share that with the world.
Yeah, the difficult part is the codification. And we have the Styx-Taxi protocols, for example, that try to do that's a way of exchanging all kinds of
information.
It could be, but it could be it's IPs and host names and binary signatures of files and all that. That's tangible and understandable. But what you're talking about is a plan, right? How do you put a plan in a JSON file? I mean,
yeah, all right, and I agree that it's hard because Styx is a format to send that kind of intelligence, but there's a bazillion permutations of how to do it.
Yeah.
But it's 2025. I would want somebody to say, here's how we're doing it as an industry. Here are the things that we're going to use Styx with. And it just kills me that 25 years later, we still haven't figured that out.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you pointed out. And I'm glad with all your experience, you actually apply it to think about these things and talk to us about it and talk to the world about it. Before we let you go, I want to first, like I said in the introduction, look at your nonprofit, what you're doing there, because I said it's going to be a time saver, right?
Absolutely. All right. The mission of the Canon project is to be the InfoSec profession's first source for curated and timeless content, right? Because we were talking about the last episode, publishers release 500 cybersecurity books every year. On YouTube, there's 250,000 cybersecurity YouTube videos every year. There's a bazillion podcasts like this one, right? How do you, as an InfoSec profession, choose the one that you need that's going to benefit you? Because if you're going to take the time to consume one of those things, you don't want to consume a bad one. So the Canon project mission is to read the books and decide which books are good and which ones you should stay away from.
Okay, and that's all on the website that we put in the show notes.
Yes.
Like last time. Last time you told me you need 3 things for this.
Yeah, we are expanding our presence, okay? We turned it into a nonprofit last summer. Before that, it was just kind of a book club. Me and my friends read books, right? But
All good things.
all good
Start like that.
Yeah, start like that. But we needed a way to bring some revenue in so that we can expand our reach and more people know about us, right? So here's what I need. I need InfoSec professionals that want to read books and write book reviews to put on the Canon webpage. And we want to cover as many books as we possibly can. Secondly, though, okay, I need some people willing to become product managers. And remember, everybody in the Canon project are volunteers. Nobody's getting paid, right? But I need vehicles to bring some revenue in.
You do have cost.
I do have costs. I got Google Suite. I got a web page. I got to pay for all that. It's not a lot, but it's every year we got to pay some money, right? So if you're interested in being a product manager and learning how to be a product manager, all right, and if you think you want to be a big time product manager somewhere down the road, you can come work for us, get a bullet on your resume, okay, and then use it to as you
and become part of a community that has a ton of experience to learn.
Right, you get to rub elbows with a bunch of senior cybersecurity people, and that's got to be good for you down the road.
The writers of the coolest books there are in cyber.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the third thing,
I need donors.
Donors.
Okay, this is a great project. It's all volunteer. It's a great asset for the InfoSec profession. We just need a couple of bucks to keep it running. If you feel generous, you feel like you want to give back to the community, dump us a couple of dollars on the donation page that you can see in the notes for this episode.
We should all be able to do so. Okay,
yes.
Well, we have them in the notes. Thank you so much. It was great having you here, and thank you for all your insights. And let's kick down the water, because I wanted to show.
That's on the blooper reel.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm afraid they're also going to put it in
the real
area, in the actual real one. Yeah, read this book, because that should probably be at the top one of the must reads.
We'll see. We'll see. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to you, our listeners, thank you very much. Hope to see you next time. And from the Security Operations Center here at Onto It, I say goodbye to you. If you liked what you saw, please like this video, like the podcast. That helps us spread the word. And while you're at it, press the bell as well, where you subscribe to the next episode, so it will be in your inbox with a push notification. See you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Onto It Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.